Welcome back, sewists. Today's video is for those who have never sewn before or who don't have formal training and have been figuring this out by themselves. We're going to learn how to read a pattern so that we can buy the right amount of fabric and how to cut it out, because it's a little like reading a foreign language the first time you do it. So let's decipher that pattern. We're going to be working with Simplicity 8912 today. This information, though, will work for most patterns that you're going to choose. So I'm going to try and give you all the basics. Let's start with just reading the back of the envelope so that we understand what they're asking here. All of these nice little charts. Patterns usually show multiple views. So if you buy a pattern, it'll have like more than one length, maybe a different neckline, maybe some sleeve options, and that's the case here. It shows it long with no sleeve, short with a sleeve, long with a sleeve, and short with no sleeve. And there is a little collar, like a Nehru collar or no collar options. So that's what's included in the pattern, and that's what the different views are. So if you look at view A, it's going to tell you how much fabric you need to make a very long one with a long sleeve. View B is going to show you how to make a short one with a sleeve and a collar. View C is long with no sleeve, and view D is short with no sleeve, but it does have the little collar. So it includes the fabric for that. Up here at the top, it's going to say what fabrics you need. And this says chambray, cotton types, gauze, lightweight denim, linen, shirtings, lightweight twills. It does not say knit. It does not say a heavy canvas or ducking, so it's telling you you want a softer, drapier fabric. Old-fashioned quilting cottons kind of fall in this also, but you want something that drapes. That's what it's designed for. If it's too stiff, it's going to hang from the body and not hang like you would like it to. Then it has our body measurements. These are in inches if you're in North America, that's what this is. And so the bust goes across your body, right across the bust. So right, to be explicit, you're going to go around the body, right across the nipples, the fullest part of your bust line. If you wear different bras, it changes your bust line measurement. So you might think about what bra you're going to wear underneath this, because it will change. So that's what the first measurement is. The waist is across your true waist. Now, the true waist is across the belly button. If you're not sure what your waist is, you can put a piece of tied elastic around your waist and kind of wiggle around, and it'll roll somewhere. Where it rolls is your true waist. It may not be where you wear your clothes, but that's what the pattern is using to measure by. So that's what you want to know. And then the hip is 9 inches below whatever you measured for your waist. So wherever that waist is, you're going to measure 9 inches down and then go around the hip. I always, for myself, find my fullest hip, because it will matter if I need to make pattern alterations, because I have a full hip. I'm fuller in the hip than I am in the bust line, even though I'm curvy both places. So that's sort of the information. And then the back neck to waist is measuring on the back of the person from the neck to where that waistline was. And that tells us if you're short-waisted or long-waisted, and if you're going to have to do alterations, it's going to show us if it had a waistline where that's going to hit on your body. That's what this information is up here. So once you know your measurements, you're going to find your size. Every one of these is going to be a little different. So let's say you're a 36 bust. It says 28 waist. Most people are not going to be like this. You're going to be a 36 bust and a 32 waist and a 42 hip, something like that. So you can see how you can be in more than one size. Buy the fabric for your largest size, which would be an 18 for this mythical person I'm talking about. And then now that you know your size, you're going to look at which pattern, which view you want. So we've decided we're a size 18, and we're going to do view B. So we're a size 18. We want to make the view B dress. And then it has two different fabric options, a 45 inch and a 60. 45 inch is how wide it is. All right, I have two fabrics here, so you can see what they mean by 45 width or 60. This is a 45 inch wide. It's folded in half. Here we go. Folded back on itself. So when I open this up all the way, it's 45 inches wide. This one is 60 inches wide. So you can see you get more fabric with the little apples than you do with this stripe. So when you're laying out, you have more fabric to work with. So that's why when you read the pattern, 45 inches, you need 3 7/8. So you need almost 4 yards of fabric to do view A dress if it's 45 inches. But you need only 3 1/4 if it's 60, because the width of the fabric, you have more options for laying out. So that's why the wider the fabric, the less you need as a rule. That's how you read the back of this. So if we're doing dress B and we have 60-inch wide fabric, for the size 18, we would only need 2 1/8 yards of fabric. But for the 45, you need 2 7/8. Now here's something else to think about. Here's our little apples. All the apples face the same direction. This is directional fabric. So when we're cutting out, if you flip a pattern piece, your apples will be upside down. It's important to think about that, and you would often add a little extra fabric. The pattern will have, in the directions here, it shows you what the pattern pieces look like, so you can kind of see how big they are. It even shows the little grain line. These little arrows are grain lines so that we don't get our pattern pieces crooked when we're laying it out. The grain line is about how the fabric is woven or knitted. It is expecting the fabric and pattern to be laid in a certain way. If you do it differently, it's going to hang differently on your body. It may not hang nicely, it may be uncomfortable, it may twist. So that's what grain line's about, and it's very important. Up here at the top shows different ways you can lay this out. It's showing it folded, and it actually says fold. So they're taking the fabric, in this case, because you can see it's long, and they are laying it out. So here's our folded edge. Here's our selvage edge. That's the edge, this edge over here that's finished off. It often will have little holes in it. That's where it was attached to the loom. So they're showing it laid out so that you have, if I laid my pattern just like the fabric, it's folded here, and it shows selvage edge over here, your fold over there, and then that's how they show you, if you follow the directions to lay it out, match up what they're doing to what you're doing. Here's my selvage edge, and here's my selvage edge. Can you see how far off they are? They're not folded correctly. If they have something that lays across here, I won't get a whole pattern piece out of it. So you want to make sure, if you're using their layout directions, that you line your folded edge or your selvage edges on top of each other and refold this. Lay it down. So here is the edge. You can see this little line right here. That's where it was folded on the bolt, and it was folded crooked, and now it's straight. Another thing you want to do when preparing is, if you have, this is knit, so this does not necessarily apply to knit, but anything you buy that is cotton or it says it's machine wash and dry, do that before you cut it out. So this fabric I've already prepared. I've taken it to my overlock and finished that edge. If you don't have an overlock, take it to your sewing machine and fold over that edge and stitch it, or zigzag along that edge so it doesn't fray while washing. So if it's a machine wash and dry fabric, throw it in with a couple towels and machine wash and dry it just like you're going to after it's made, because there may be some shrinkage. This was 100% cotton, and there was some shrinkage, not a lot. If you buy 100% cotton, buy a little extra to allow for shrinkage. Get yourself an extra 1/4 yard or so that you don't end up cutting it out and finding out you're just a couple inches shy of what you need because it shrank in the wash. You want to pre-shrink it so that once you sew it and wash it, your entire garment doesn't shrink. You've taken the shrink out. Also, it takes out any of the fading that might happen in your fabric, especially if you have dark indigos like this. They tend to fade a little. You get a little loss of dye. These are all these on this side. See all of these cutting layouts? And these are all options for cutting layouts. Again, assuming you don't have a nap or directional fabric. Nap is like, think of velvet. You can brush it one way, it looks one direction. You brush it another way, it looks another. This is not necessarily something you would be cutting out of velvet, but as a general rule, if you have a nappy fabric, it makes a difference. Here, this little key says pattern printed side down. They shade it in. Pattern with the printed side up is clear. And the reason they do that is to let you know when they flip the pattern when they're working on this. So you can see this sleeve is dark. and this one is light, they flip the pattern over. The reason they're doing that is they couldn't layer and cut the pattern because of the width of the fabric, and you need a right and a left sleeve. If you don't flip it, you end up with 2 right sleeves. If you come over here, these are symbols, and we're going to talk about this more when we're cutting, but you have a straight of grain. If you have an arrow that turns the corner, and you have a line with arrows that turn the corner, that's always for fold. Sometimes you will have 3 circles in sort of a triangular shape that also can be the fold. They'll have dotted lines for your center, front, and back. Then you have notches, which are these little triangles. You have dots, which are marking things, cutting lines, lengthening and shortening lines. And we're going to talk about that when we're actually pulling our pattern apart to get it ready. This has a pocket in this one. I'm always adding pockets if they don't have it, but we don't have to today. Hooray. So we're going to just open this up, and you'll notice, look at all, it's pattern piece 10, but look, they're individual ones. So we want to find the one for the size we're using. If we're making the collar, I'm not going to make the collar, but if you were, here's a size 18 for number 10, we'd want to cut out that one. So I'm going to be doing the short dress, and the first thing I'm going to do is just cut these away from each other, not necessarily on the cutting line, but I just want my pattern pieces separated so they're easier to work with. So I'm just separating out my dress front from the other pattern pieces, and then I'm going to take these over to my ironing board, and I'm going to iron them with no steam. You don't want steam when you're ironing paper. When you're ready to cut out, so we've decided we're going to do view B right here next to these line drawings. It tells us what pattern pieces we need for view B. So number 1 is the front for all of them, so we need pattern piece 1. Number 2 is the back for all of them, so we need pattern piece 2. Number 3 is the neck facing for everything, so we need number 3. Number 4 is the back facing for all views, so we need number 4. Number 5 is the pocket for all views, so we need number 5. Number 6 is the sleeve if you're doing A or B. We're doing B, so we need the sleeve. I'm going to shorten my sleeve, so I don't need the sleeve band, but if you're doing the sleeve as it is, you'll also need the sleeve band and the tab and the pocket. And the neck band, if you're doing this little neck band, I'm not. I'm actually going to be doing the view. I want no neck band on mine. So those are options we can make. We can change things as we go because this is all meant to fit together. So I'm going to have, it's going to be this neckline with a sleeve in this length, and I can make those choices. And I know if I bought enough fabric for view B, I'll have enough fabric to make those changes for myself. So I'm going to now cut out, and if it's easier for you, get a little pencil and circle the ones you need to cut out, especially if it's one of your first patterns that you've made. Size, I'm going to cut for myself, I think I'm going to cut a 20 in the neckline, and then I'm going to increase the hip. I'm not going to do a breast pocket because when you're busty, a breast pocket just adds to the bust line. And since I have an actual hip pocket, I don't even need it. I'm just going to cut apart all the pieces I need. So I'm going to cut the top. A 20 is pretty close to what I need for my top. And then I'm going to increase the hip, and I'll show you how to do the cheater way, the easy way to do that. All these pattern pieces we don't need, I'm not getting rid of them because I sew for other people, especially my mom. So I'm going to just fold those up and put them back in the envelope. Here's my back number 2. Just going to cut away these that I don't need because I'm not doing the collar. All of these can go back in the envelope. I'm going to get the pieces I don't need and put them together. And I press these with the iron so that they go back in nice and neat. So here is how I iron my patterns to put them away. I fold and I give it a good press with no steam, and I always fold it so I can see the pattern information right here so I know what pattern number it is, because when you go to sew again and you have to pull everything out, it's really handy to be able to see that. So I'm folding this in one-handed, giving it a good press so that it'll fit back in the envelope easily. And I've done it so that I can see what pattern number I have. I don't need the sleeve band. Oop, I have the fan on, it's blowing my pattern pieces around. But I do need the sleeve. I'm just going to shorten it to a short sleeve. I'll show you how to do that. All right, now let's just talk down here about these 2A and 1A pattern pieces. I'm going to use my phone as a weight. This pattern is so long, if you're doing the long version, that they actually have the part of it printed on a separate piece of paper. And the way this works is you take 2A and 2, and they have these little targets, and you just line the targets on top of each other and tape it down, or use straight pins. Get it perfectly lined up, and we have now lengthened our pattern. You can tape it on and then cut out your size and you're ready to go. So that's what 2A and 1A are, and you just join it to the appropriate one. So here's 2A, here's 2, and now we have the extra long pattern piece if you want to cut out the long view. All right, I've gone to the iron and I've just ironed everything to make it nice and crisp and flat, and to get rid of a lot of the wrinkles and make sure that there's no little foldovers or pleats on my pattern. I'm going to cut my pattern on top as a size 20, so I want a size 20 sleeve. So if you look at this, it's confusing. There's a number down here, 16 with a circle, that's nowhere on a line. And why? Why would they put the circle way down here when the cutting line is way up here? You can see over here it says 16 right next to that line. This is the stitching line. So if you cut on this line here, this is 5/8 of an inch in from that line. That's what that circle with the 16 is. These are to help us know where we're going to do a little basting stitches and stuff, which we will see next week. That's what these markings are for, and I will talk more about that in next week's video. So that's why you have these circles that are offset from the lines that don't make sense. Up here you can see the 16 right on that line, so that you know this is the cutting line I want. Sometimes the cutting lines will be different. You'll have dashed and dotted lines to help it be easier for you to see the difference. They did not do that this time. So the easiest way, if you're new to this and you're cutting and you're not the smallest or the largest size in your pattern, we know 16 is the smallest in this pattern, and I want a 20, so it's the third line, 16, 18, 20. And then I will take a pencil or something and make it red, so that I can tell this is the line that I want to cut, like this. Now the other thing I did, I don't want the extra long, this whole long sleeve, right? I want a shorter sleeve. So I'm on this little double line right here, which is our length and shorten line. That's about the length that I would like my sleeve. So what I did is I folded the whole pattern up to the length that I want it, and then I'm going to have just a little bit of hem in there. And then I folded the rest of it down so that when I cut out, I don't cut off the bottom of this pattern. See how I'm going to be cutting up here? If I just folded this in half and flipped it over, I would cut away the whole bottom of my sleeve. So I want to make sure I fold that out of the way so that nothing is hanging out, so that when I cut the size I want, I've reserved this size so I can cut a long sleeve if I want to later. Now if you know you'll never cut a long sleeve, then don't worry about it. You can just cut it off. But I'm going to put a couple pins to hold this together. And then I'm going to go ahead, and I always do this, I'm going to cut it to the size I want before I start. If you're cutting or altering patterns and you do not start with the size you want, so I want a 20, so I'm going to cut my pattern apart on the 20. And don't worry about the triangles yet. We're just going to cut right past them. Cut carefully. The more carefully you cut, the easier it's going to be when it's time to sew. And if you need to, trace all the way around this with your red pencil so that you have no problem discerning what line to cut on. It's always a little confusing where the lines start to blend together. There's my sleeve ready to go. Now we're going to do this prep work for everything, but I'm going to show you the cheater way to do a little fast alteration if you need to increase the hip like I do. So here's my sleeve. I've got pins in it. It's ready to go. I'm going to set it aside. And now let's look at our back here. So I know on top I'm just going to cut it as a 20. So I'm going to just leave it as is, and I'm going to cut all along this line 20 here. I'm going to mark it with my hot pink pencil. Now I don't do this every time, but if you're a new sewist, this is a good thing to do. So I'm going to cut my top at a size 20. I'm going to do this for the front and the back. Where the waistline is, see this little line right here? It says waistline. So this area here is our waistline. These big circles here are for our pocket placement, so we don't have to do anything yet, but that's why they're there. So I'm happy with the size 20, which is this third one, all the way till the waistline. But when I get down here to the hip, it's not enough. So I want to come all the way out to the 24 for my hip, right? So what I'm going to do is, starting at the waistline, I'm going to slowly ease this out like that. Now that's in that pocket placement, which is fine. We can just move our little circle over and the pocket's going to do fine in there. Depending on how your hip is, if you have a high hip, you might want to come out a little faster. If you have a low hip like I do, make it more gradual. What you don't want is a point. So we want to make sure we make that nice and smooth. So at the top, I'm cutting at a size 20. At the bottom, I'm cutting at a size 24. Down here is our length. Always double check your length. Often I want to add an inch or two to the length, or I don't put as deep a hem as it says. This one has an 1¼ inch hem total allowed in it. So you want to check that and make sure that it's long enough for you. Down here at the bottom of the back of your pattern jacket, it actually has finished garment measurements for the size, and here is the length from the base of the neck. So for the size 20, here's our 20 down. Here we are, I'm doing B, so it is 38¼ inches. So on yourself, hold the finished length, whatever it is, at the base of your neck in the back, and let the tape measure drop, and wherever it ends, that's the length. Now I did this on myself and it ends right at the back of my knee for me, which is perfect. It's a knee length dress. That's how you want to measure your center back length. So we're going to just now trim this out, and I'm going to check my length real quick. All right, I checked my length and it is exactly at the knee, so I can live with that. So now I'm going to cut this one apart with a 20 on top. Now this is the center back seam, so I am going to cut down there. If it's on the fold, I don't worry about it as much. Cut through the sleeve. I'm not showing all of the pattern alterations you can do. Pattern alteration, there's a lot to it. I'm just showing you the most basic and easiest way to go from one side to another. Now you could do the opposite. You could be narrow in the hip and fuller in the bust, and you can definitely change that shape too. If you have a pattern that's real curvy, you can even just straighten out the waistline. If it's one that does not have a seam at the waist. Down here at the bottom, I'm doing the short one, so I'm going to kind of do like I did at the sleeve. I'm going to fold this up and take it to my iron so that I can keep that for another day. And it's slightly curved, so I'm going to let that's one thing with tissue paper, it's pretty flexible and will let you curve it a little bit. And then I'm going to fold these back out of the way so I don't cut them off, and give it a press and put a pin in it, and then that's ready to go too. I trim that away, then it's easier for me to see where to fold that back. Okay, now I'll put a couple pins in that. I always like to pin it on the right side of the pattern, which is the side where you can read everything. I use pins instead of tape because tape will tear up my pattern. It's harder to pull it out, where pins, I can easily pull it out. So there's my back. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go from one size to another, but we have to make sure that they match here on the side seam. So I'm going to lay them on top of each other just like they're going to be sewn. Flip it over so the one I've already altered is on top. And we're going to line this up, size 20 to size 20. We've got, see these notches? That's actually where they sew together. So I'm going to put our notches on top of each other so that I get my pattern lined up. And then I can take my pencil. Now don't worry about everything else. We're worrying just about where our alteration is and where our markings are right here. And now I can transfer that shape that I just made so that they line up nice when I go to sew, like that. I hope that pink shows up. And now I'm ready to cut this one out. And I wanted to use this one because it has a dart, and darts are important and they can be also confusing. So this one has a seam in the center front. Sometimes they're on the fold. So we're going to cut this away because we will be cutting down the center front. Cut as accurately as possible right on that line or right next to that line. You will have no choice to be inaccurate in your sewing because the cutting line's already messed up where you're supposed to sew. It's quite confusing to the eye. So we're going to count. Here's our number, here's our 20, here's our 20. And so if you look, it's really hard to tell which one of these lines is our 20, right? So here's 16, 18, this one right here is our 20. So we're going to be cutting like, whoop, tore my tissue, like that. So I'm going to cut it so you can see it. Are we in the, yeah. So here's our darts. We are not cutting in here. These dashed lines are our sewing lines, not our cutting lines. We're cutting here like this for the size 20. So now I'm going to follow my pink line that I just traced. And now these will match up to each other. And then I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. I'm going to fold this out, and then this one's ready to go. The other pattern pieces that we have, we just need to cut them out as they are, except for this one right here. And we're just going to cut this one on the 20. This one, when we get ready to cut, we need this of interfacing as well, and I will show you that in the cutting. This should match your neckline, so you want to be careful to get those shapes right, but we're going to get that one completely cut out, our pocket and our back one, and then we will be ready to start laying out on the fabric. We're going to now start talking about cutting out. This is 45-inch wide fabric. It has a stripe in it. It's not directional, but it does have a stripe, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about working with that just because it matters to me when I'm putting it together. If this is your first project, choose a fabric with no pattern or a non-directional pattern, something you don't have to match up, because that is just one step extra you probably don't want to tackle in your first project. It is cotton, so I have pre-shrunk it. I washed and dried it like I'm going to treat the garment once it's sewn. It's folded on itself, 45-inch wide, so here you can see selvage edge and selvage edge, folded edge over here, wrong side, so this is the side that's not as pretty, right side, the side that is pretty. I'm going to pull it down. Now you could cut on the floor, you can cut on your kitchen counter, whatever works for you. We're going to read our pattern pieces so we know what we need to do. So this one, this is our back facing. This is one of the only ones that's cut on the fold, and if you see, it has there are little arrows that turn the corner, and it says cut one on the pattern. It actually tells us cut one on fold of the fabric, and then it'll say cut one of interfacing. I'll tell you about that in just a minute. We're going to get all of our regular fabric cut first, so we know that has to go on the fold. So at some point, this is going to have to go on this folded edge. That's what it means, and you actually get it to line up right on that edge. Get it as close as possible, not over, not under, because then you change the fit. Everything else, we just need to cut two. Cut two sleeves, cut two fronts, and cut two backs. That's all of our pieces. So here's my back. Oh, and we also have facings and pockets. We have to cut 4 pockets, unless you're only putting them on one side. So here's my back. It's not cut on the fold. We need to. There's a seam. It's actually got some shaping. So here's my back. Now I have this line of stitching here, so depending on how I lay the back, I can either have no where the back is, I can have no embroidery, no stitching, or I can lay it out so that that stitching goes right through the middle of my back. And if possible, I'm going to lay it so that I have just the navy part. Let me show you what this grain line is for. You need a tape measure or a ruler and some pins to do grain line, and it's very important. And actually, I want to start with the front, not the back, I think. The front's the most important, so we're going to switch to front. And there is a seam, so I need to cut 2 of the fashion fabric. I have it with the right side up, and here's my grain line. So the way the grain line works, I'm going to always make sure that you have fabric below up here that you're not going to cut out and find out that the back was a little lower. I'm going to take, before I pin anything down, I'm going to kind of get it in the area I want it. And I'm going to put a pin at one end of my arrow, and I'm going to measure over either to the fold or to the selvage right from that pin. So if I put my tape measure at the pin and I come to my selvage, I'm measuring not to the fringy part, but right to where the edge of the fabric is. It is 6 3/8. So I'm going to come down to this other end. I'm going to put my tape measure on 6 3/8 on that edge, and I'm going to pull it across. And can you see that my tape measure does not fall on that line, which means I can now swing this out. This is anchored with the pin poking down, so I'm not moving that. And now my grain line is straight. And I'm going to put another pin straight down. And now that's holding my fabric, my grain line straight. And the way I've laid this out is when I sew this together on the 5/8 inch, hopefully my stripe, if I cut this correctly, my stripe won't be all wonky, and I will have a nice pretty front edge. So I'm going to check my stripe as I go to make sure that I don't have it crooked. This curves away up here, which is fine. It's right along here. This is straight, so this should be straight. And actually, you can even use the woven in stripe. If you have a woven in design like this, a plaid or a stripe, you can even use that to measure your grain line on. You can lay that line right on top of it. We're going to do that. That's laying out one piece, but you can see I've got it right in the middle. And that's because I was worried about my direction of my fabric and the design of my fabric. This isn't directional, so I can flip my pocket upside down. I've got to cut this 4 times total. So if I lay it on here, I'm getting 2 because my fabric's folded in half. So I can get 2 pockets. I can get, here's my neck facing, so I need to get 2 of those. I need to get a back and a sleeve, and this has to go on the fold. Now, I'm not following exactly on their directions. Don't cut this out yet. Put some pins in to hold it in place. I'm going to put a few pins to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Go ahead and put a pin in this. Now pockets could even be cut out of like a lightweight batiste or broadcloth or something. Now I've got these sort of where I want them. I'm going to just fold this up and move my fabric so that I can lay out some more things. I always lay out the biggest pieces first. Now I am not following their directions. I'm just doing this on my own, keeping my fabric lined up very carefully, folding as I go. Now here's my back. I'm going to be doing the same thing with the back, lining it up, and I'm actually going to look through my pattern paper and line it up with the design below because it's on grain. Make sure my selvages are lined up, and then I know that's going to work. Then I can take this piece and I can flip it over. I can do it right side or wrong side because I'm cutting 2. Either way, I end up with a right and a left, and they're fine. So I can flip it like that. And then what's going to be left is a sleeve and this thing, and because I've shortened it, I have enough down here to cut that. So now I'm going to go ahead, put a few more pins in it. Now again, I'm not cutting according to their directions. I'm just laying out and cutting. This back has quite a bit of shaping in it actually, which is good. That will give you some fitting. I'm looking through my pattern. Here's my grain line, and I'm lining it up with the stripe of this fabric from below. Can you see these little right on this outer edge? So I know it's on grain because this is a woven in, not printed in pattern, and so that pattern is on grain. The more time you spend on this, the better your garment will turn out in the end. Used to be cutting was my least favorite. I hated it, couldn't wait to get to the sewing machine. And so what I would do when I first started sewing is when I was in the mood to cut, I would cut 5 or 6 projects out that day. I would just cut a whole lot. And then when I was in the mood to sew, I had a whole lot of projects ready to sew. Make sure I can get plenty in here. And I still have to get one more set of pockets, which is not a big deal. I'm actually going to move this down because I think I could get a pocket right there. You want to be careful not to get right on the edge of your selvage. This one is woven so that there's not, some selvages are super tight. You don't want that in your garment. It actually will change the fit. This one does not. The only tight part is right on the very edge. Again, keeping the grain line, I can see it through my pattern paper. Now when pinning, you can see I'm pinning these corners down, but I'm not pinning over. You want your pins to not be where you're going to be cutting. So you always stay on the tissue for your pinning. Now that those are pinned, just going to continue to roll it up. And I always do this so that I know I have enough fabric. So now I can get 2 sleeves, a right and a left down here. And I can get my one little back neck facing in right there. And I'm cut out, and I have this piece left. I had this happen with the other one. I had a nice chunk left over because I altered it. I shortened it. And because of that, this is perfect like tea towel fabric. So I'm gonna make another tea towel or two out of that. I still have to get that extra pocket though. Now this one's the one that goes on the fold, so I'm lining it right on that edge. Now here's our sleeve. I'm going to use the fabric below. I can see my lines. I'm going to use that for my grain line. If you don't have that, put the pins in it, measure to the edge, either the folded edge or the other edge. I want to make sure my stripes are good. All right, we're all pinned and ready to go. Now, if you're following along with the directions, you're going to fold it and lay your pattern pieces. The thing that they do with that one is once they cut everything out, they open it up and you have a middle piece that's not cut out of, and they cut 2 sleeves in that area. They open it up flat, so you have only one layer. You cut one sleeve, flip it over to cut the other sleeve. We have 2 layers of fabric, so when I cut this out, I'm cutting through both layers. I'm going to have a right and a left sleeve. If you don't have enough fabric for that, this is what you would do. Personally, I would buy more fabric and cut it like this, especially if you're new at sewing and you can afford an extra half a yard or a yard of fabric. If you do the long sleeve, you need 3/4 of a yard just to get that sleeve in there. But it's easier to cut out. You're going to have more accuracy, and it's going to be less stressful for you. Now that I've done all of this, I'm actually ready to start cutting. And I can start cutting down here. I'll cut around this, and then as I get it cut, I'll just keep unrolling and going and cut my entire garment out. Remembering that I still have to get one more set of pockets when I'm done. I always pin. I know a lot of people like to do pattern weights. The thing with pattern weights is it's very hard to do all of this manipulation and moving for checking with a pattern weight. You can't roll your pattern weights up into the, like you can a pin. I'm going to talk to you about notches really quickly. Some people like to cut their notches so that they hang off when they're sewing. I don't. I'm going to completely cut it apart, and then I'm going to show you how to do the clip-in method. I personally don't like to do the cut the notch hanging out. That's what these little triangles are. So you have a little triangle hanging out. That's not my preferred method. If you like to do it that way, go ahead. Now when you cut, I'm going to cut off my fabric down here at the bottom, right along the edge of my sleeve. All right. So here's my edge I just cut off. When cutting, you want to keep your scissors straight. You don't want to turn them either direction. That actually will make the top and the bottom layers different sizes. You will change the fit. So the straighter the scissor, the more accurate and carefully you cut. I cut shorter. You can probably hear it. I cut lots of little short cuts instead of going long cuts, just for accuracy. So you can see how it's cutting out. If you love this fabric, it's from Hobby Lobby. In the ducking, which is usually a pretty heavy, but once you pre-shrink it, it softens up very nicely. So here's my sleeve. Now this is how I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do your notches now. So if you're through here and you don't want to sew this up, you know what we're doing. Here's my notch. Make sure you do the one that's for your size. So this is my size that I'm doing. I take my scissors and I go straight in 1/4 inch or less right through the middle of that notch. And I get a little tiny clip. So I do that for every notch. So this is a single notch. Single notches are front. Here's my double notch, tiny clip. Now if you only have 1/4 inch seam allowance, don't do this method. You can come in and mark it with a pencil, but we have 5/8 inch seam allowance, so we have plenty. So I've now marked both notches for my sleeve. Back has 2, front has 1, and then we'll come and mark these with marking pencil later next week when we're ready to sew. All right, I'm going to finish cutting out. So I have everything cut out, and I don't want to cut into my big scrap because I really would like to use that for a kitchen towel. So I have this piece. This was the center fold next to the center back that I cut out, and I have opened it up, and I'm folding it back on itself, lining up my stripes, because all that I have left is this pocket. I need one more set of pockets. And if I do that, you can see I can easily get another set of pockets out of this scrap. Now this won't work. It's not as big a deal on a pocket if you're directional fabric, like you can end up with your horses upside down, but it's inside a pocket, so it doesn't matter as much. Like if you have to fudge somewhere, inside the pocket is the place to fudge. Interfacing, the pieces that need interfacing, you're going to just lift this up when we're through cutting and cut it exactly the same way for your interfacing. If you've never bought interfacing before, you mostly will find it in white, but you can also get it in gray and black. And when I'm sewing on something dark, a lot of times I'll buy the darker color because I just think it looks better from the wrong side. This is fusible. It looks like a felted fabric. You can buy knit, you can buy woven, and you can buy this, which is our most traditional kind. This side's nice and smooth and kind of soft. The other side has little dots. That's the glue that we use to fuse it to it. Now the fusible is just to keep it in place while you're working with it to sew, and the sewing eventually keeps it in place. So don't expect the fusing to make it last forever. Fusing is really there just for while you're working with it while sewing. So this is what it looks like. It's not nearly as wide. You want to cut it so that you have the piece that's got the glue on it is going to glue to the wrong side of your fabric. But that's it for cutting interfacing. You want to make sure you buy a little bit. It goes a long way. I keep all my little scraps of it and everything because interfacing goes behind buttonholes and behind all kinds of things that you might need it for, or need a little scrap. You can stick it in behind there. It works great. You make it grommets. I love me some good fusible interfacing. It comes in lots of weights. Buy a lighter weight one for clothing. If you're making purses and bags, you buy a heavyweight one for something like that. You do not want a real heavyweight interfacing in something like this. It'll make your neckline so stiff. You won't be really happy with it. I'm cutting out my interfacing. I've just folded it over wide enough to get my two front facings and my back facing on the fold. You can definitely unpin this and pin down just your pattern piece if you're comfortable with it. And you don't want to trim away anything extra. You want to keep right on that outer edge so that you're keeping everything accurate. And we're ready to cut these out. I hope this helps you as you're learning to sew some of the basics and what you're looking at on your pattern. The pattern has so much information, and I didn't cover everything. This is really for round one, first project. If you're buying a commercial pattern, these things you will see on all of them, depending on what it is. Even if you don't have a facing or a sleeve or whatever, the markings will be the same. It'll say pattern front, pattern back, cut one on fold two. Usually if you have cut two, it won't be on fold. Sometimes you will need a cut two on fold, so you'll have to pick it up and move it to cut a second one on the fold. Lots of things to read and look at. So if this is your first project that you're working on, even if it's a different project, read through your instructions, look at all of the pictures. They are helpful. And also look and see if somebody's made a tutorial on it out there. It's amazing if you put the pattern number in, somebody out there sewn it, and that may really help you. I sew a lot. I have one pattern a week just about that I sew. I sew for men, women, children, home, lots of things. So put the pattern in my search bar on my channel and see if I've sewn it or something similar, and it might help you. Even if it's not the exact same pattern number, if it's a raglan sleeve top, I've done lots of raglan sleeve tops. I might have something really close that will help you get over the hump if you're stuck or confused. If you do want to sew this up with me or just see how it finishes, come back next week. I will be doing the sewing portion of this. Again, treating it like you've never sewn before or you're very new at this. That's what we're doing this go round for all of you new sewists out there. I hope this takes a little bit of the frustration out. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments below. I do check in, not always on the same day, but pretty often I check in and try to answer your questions. And this video is actually made because someone posted on one of my other videos that they got stuck in the cutting and was super confused. And so you may get a video made just for you to help with the cutting or with whatever you might be working on. Check out my not my video shorts, but I have a whole section of sewing shorts that are like darts, grain line, lots of the basics that are not very long, 10 minutes or less, that go over some of the basics for that too. So you might just kind of scroll through my playlist and see if there's something that will help you. Please like and subscribe if you like my content. It helps my channel and it helps other sewists find our community. I'll see you next week for another fun sewing video.